Web Marketing That Works podcast, episode 59 with Jaime Tardy from Eventual Millionaire.
Welcome to the Web Marketing That Works podcast. Come behind the scenes of real-life marketing experiments and listen in as amazing guests confess the truth about what really works. Now, here are your hosts, Adam Franklin and Toby Jenkins.
I'm Adam Franklin, and you are listening to the Web Marketing That Works podcast. Today's guest is Jaime Tardy from the Eventual Millionaire. And before I introduce you to her, I just want to let you know that the Web Marketing That Works podcast is the show for people who love marketing on the web. You'll be taken behind the scenes of real-life marketing experiments where we look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. We confess what's failed and reveal the truth about what really works. Now, this show is brought to you by our book, also called Web Marketing That Works, and specifically the 33 templates that go with it. Now, they're free, and you can get your hands on those at bluewiremedia.com.au/book. Now, today's guest, Jaime Tardy, is someone who I have dreamed of having on the show for close to a year now. Her book, The Eventual Millionaire, was based on her very popular podcast of the same name, The Eventual Millionaire, where she's interviewed over 150 millionaire entrepreneurs. She's been featured on many news outlets like CNN, MSN, Success Magazine, and Yahoo, and has all of her interviews at eventualmillionaire.com. Part of what I find fascinating about Jaime's story is that she actually left her corporate job after finding herself $70,000 in debt and hating her job. And then with the ambitious goal and a strategic plan, she was actually out of debt and out of the job she hated in just 16 months. She now works 20 hours per week as an entrepreneurial coach, and her husband is a performing artist, and I'm led to believe he's a contortionist who gets to travel around the country. So Jaime's there working 20 hours a week and spending the rest of her time with her family. It's a fantastic story, and there's plenty of gems in this interview. The ones that I particularly enjoy relate to how she's gone about securing some of her high-profile guests on her show. Anyway, let's begin. On the line I have Jaime Tardy from the Eventual Millionaire. Welcome, Jaime.
Thanks so much for having me, Adam.
It's a pleasure. And whereabouts in the world are you tuning in from?
I am now in Austin, Texas. Woohoo! I just moved here like a year ago.
Oh, very good, very good. Well, as you know, I'm down in Sydney and very excited to be up so early to have a chat with you.
Up so early. It's ridiculous. Thank you so much for getting up at 3 a.m. to do this. You have no idea how awesome that is.
It is my pleasure, absolutely. Now, Jaime, I see that you work 20 hours a week with your coaching business. Is this just the client-facing work that you do, or is this 20 hours per week all up, like you're a true lifestyle entrepreneur?
Well, I probably do about 30 now that my kids are in school. And during lunch times, it probably gets up to 40 for sure. But no, normal, that's normal time. That's not client facing time. That's how much time I'm working on my business at the time. The whole point of having this as a business was to really be able to be with my family, especially when my kids were young at the very beginning. So at the very beginning, it was only 20 hours a week because that's all I had. And I tried to maximize, of course, as much as humanly possible. But no, it was definitely not just client facing. It was everything in 20 hours.
That is so good to hear. Now, just before we kick off the other questions, just so our listeners are all on the same page, how do you define a millionaire versus an eventual millionaire?
So the people that I interview have a net worth of at least $1 million, assets minus liabilities. An eventual millionaire is someone who has the goal to be a millionaire, but I like to say eventually, right? But they want an enjoyable life first and an enjoyable business. So it's about like enjoying your life beforehand and then making money. Because I love money. I'm not ashamed to say that. I have it all in my book, but I only want to do it after I'm already happy.
Awesome. Okay then, well, would you mind giving us a brief overview of your business and what it looks like today?
Oh, for sure. So I have 2 team members. I have a full-time online business manager, and I also have an executive assistant, Kendra and Natalie. They are utterly amazing. And thankfully, they do a lot of the work, so I only have to work 30 hours a week. So most of the stuff that I'm doing now is content creation and product creation and that sort of thing, and they sort of run the rest of the side. So thankfully, we've got some amazing people, so I don't have to do it all anymore.
Awesome. And then, so you've got some in-person coaching that you do, and then also some online courses, right?
Definitely. So occasionally I do some one-on-one coaching, and then I have a couple clients, a handful. I used to only do that. I was an offline business coach for a long time before I even went online. And then I, started group coaching programs. So I've got that one coming up really soon. And then I also have products. I have a mastermind kit, so you can create your own mastermind group, and a program called Millionaire Start. So if somebody doesn't have a business, they can learn how millionaires would start a business. So yeah, we've got a lot of different things going on.
Cool. And what is your philosophy on web marketing?
So see, that's a great question. When I was first starting, I had no idea. I was a huge geek, right? I'm a computer nerd. I have a degree in IT, but I didn't know the marketing side as far as online goes. I was a business coach, so I knew offline marketing really, really well. Most of the people I worked with were doing offline marketing. And so when I sort of dove into this, I was like, wait a minute, people just give content away for free and they work their butts off and just give things? I'm like, that's not a great business model. But as I dove into it and really understood, the whole point is to get somebody to know, like, and trust you. I'm a huge content marketing fan, right? You have a podcast. I have a podcast too. And so being able to give first and have people know, like, and trust you, it's way easier to have them purchase something from you later. And you're just helping the other people that don't purchase. So, I'm a huge fan of content marketing in general.
And you've got that generosity, that mindset of being generous first, and then further down the track, once they get to know, like, and trust you, then they might spend money with you later.
Exactly. And the thing is that all those other people that aren't buying things, I'm still helping them too, which makes me feel good. That's one of the reasons why I'm doing it.
Yeah, and that's a great feeling, isn't it? Because what would you say out of that huge audience that you have, both on email and your podcast and blog and everything, what percentage would you say actually spend money with you versus that you help for free?
Oh, a couple percent. Maybe 5% at the most.
Yeah.
So it's not a ton. But the cool thing is, I get emails from people that are like, you changed my life. And I've never worked with them personally or in a group, or, they've never bought one of my programs. I'm like, just listening to my podcast, I can change people's lives. That's insane. And I can make a great living on 5% for sure. So yeah, we're just extremely lucky to be able to have the internet and do what we do. Cause I lived in the middle of nowhere in Maine when I was building this whole company. And, it didn't matter that I lived in the woods. You know what I mean? You can build this and reach people anywhere and help people anywhere. So I'm a huge geek towards the internet and web marketing for sure.
That's awesome. Because the web plus being generous, it really scales, doesn't it? And if 5% of people are buying from you now, all those other people are just on their journey towards potentially buying tomorrow or next week or next year. And I guess the more we can help people with what we publish for free, then the more likely they are to eventually decide to buy from us.
Definitely. And I'm not a pushy salesperson. If it's the right time, I know my stuff can help you, and I just wait for that time, right? And people will come around. And that way they build their business the way they want to. And there's so much free stuff online. Actually, I think it's sort of a detriment a little bit when I work with clients or in my group coaching program. It's kind of funny. I make people stop listening to podcasts, even my own. I'm like, I will tell you if there is a specific podcast you should listen to, but no, stop right now. Because we get into information overload, right? And when you have information overload, it makes it a little difficult to actually take action and see tons of results in your business. So yeah, well, I love the model. Don't get me wrong. I make people stop once they start working with me.
Because it can be incredibly distracting, give you reasons to procrastinate and everything, right? And later in the interview, I'm going to talk to you about, the power of patience and the importance of focus as well. So I'll be very keen to hear what you've got to say about my questions coming up. Now, Jamie, in terms of something I love to do is marketing experiments. I like to be a guinea pig with my own business and see what works and what doesn't work so that I can pass on the good bits to my clients. In this section, I like to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. So firstly, the good. What's worked really well for you?
So podcasting, of course, has worked really, really well for me. Number one, I got into it because it took me a long time to write. I never considered myself a writer. I got a C in the English class when I was growing up, and I was a straight A student, so I was like, I'm horrible. I'm a horrible writer. But when I started a blog, because blogging was so popular, I started mine back in 2010. I was like, okay, this is what you're supposed to do. And I would take forever to write. And my mastermind group one day was like, you should start a podcast. Actually, two of them in my mastermind group had already had a podcast and were doing quite well with it. And I was like, that's a great idea. I can talk all day long, but writing, not my forte. And so it's been amazing, especially since podcasting apparently wasn't all that popular 5 years ago. It's amazing to sort of see the growth and how people have really latched onto it, especially in the last few years. So I'm really like, that worked really, really well. I was apparently going on an upward trend, which worked out well for me.
Good timing. Now, how about the bad? What's failed for you, and what might you do differently as a result of that lesson?
Oh, there's a lot. It's funny. I think one of the worst things, I guess, which isn't exactly a tactic, but it's not doing anything. So in general, my podcast was growing, and that was great. And I sort of let it go at that. So I didn't do really any marketing. I didn't even write anything. I didn't do SEO. I didn't do a lot of marketing at all at the very beginning, and I really wish that I did. I was like, oh, it's growing. Great. But especially at the time, if I started 5 years ago really marketing what I was doing, I mean, it would have grown huge at the beginning. Instead of me going like, oh, things are going well, la, 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 and like letting it grow sort of organically and slowly. Like now we're really diving into Facebook ads and a bunch of other pieces. And I really wish I sort of hopped on that bandwagon way earlier, because it's a little more crowded now than it used to. The cool thing with podcasting is I sort of jumped in at the beginning. And so you're always sort of looking for trends, because as soon as everybody's doing it, the market's a bit more saturated. And so I wish I paid attention to that a little bit more at the beginning.
But I guess at least at the same time, you still picked one thing and really ran with it and focused on it, rather than spreading yourself too thin and, maybe not getting as much traction, but, trying to do everything at the start.
Definitely. I call it shotgun marketing, right? So I see this all the time with my clients who are like, I'm going to try a little of this. I'm going to try a little of that. I'm going to try a little of this. And they don't stick with anything long enough to tweak it to see if it actually works. I'm sure you've come across that quite a bit. Like, I tried this thing and so-and-so said it was going to be great and it didn't work at all. And it could just be like your headline or your copy or something small that you could have tweaked to make it a lot better. But they give it up, and then they try another one, and then they give it up, and then they try another one. And it's not like a real test. I'll go and ask my clients or potentials, and they're like, well, I don't know what it gave me. And I'm like, you didn't write it down? And they're like, I didn't know. I didn't have any analytics on it. I didn't check. And I'm like, well, then you don't know if it worked or not, did you? Like, if it wasn't an overwhelming thing, sometimes it's small. We don't notice, and we can definitely ramp it up. But when we're not really paying attention to what the results are, getting the feedback and then tweaking that feedback, then we're just sort of shooting in the air, not really knowing where we're going to go.
Yeah, and it takes a bit of pushing through the pain on whatever you choose to do, right? But to actually, it's not going to be smooth sailing right from the start, but to push through a bit of pain and to come out the other side and to then go, all right, well, I understand how, say a podcast works. Now let me understand email marketing or sales copy or, webinars or something else. But to try and do it all at once would be a fool's game. But to not stick at it long enough, as you say, is quite a common mistake, I guess, as well. So
yeah, it's huge. And millionaires do that all the time. So they have like a testing strategy. I've dove into this, right? Because I wanted to know exactly what they do too. They test, they see if things work, they tweak, right? They don't just give up right away, that perseverance of checking. Because the thing is that when you listen to a ton of podcasts, or you read a bunch and they're like, this is the hot new tactic. And you're like, man, I got to try the hot new tactic. And then you try it and you're like, oh man, it didn't work for me. It doesn't mean that it's not necessarily going to work for you. And so having that testing and the perseverance to check and really check it off your list and be like, never mind, that wasn't as good as this or this, that's huge.
Now, on page 190 of your book, you talk about the power of patience. So it's a good segue into this. And there's an ultra marathon saying that you mentioned in the book, start slow and slow down. In an online world where we see people, I guess, bursting out of the blocks in, what appears to be really quickly, how important is this idea of being patient and sticking with stuff for you and for millionaires and for the millionaires you've interviewed as well?
That's the funny thing. I mean, I've seen this a lot, and you've probably seen it a lot, or people starting a podcast and being super excited and then quitting after 2 months. Or, even the people that I have seen that sort of burst onto the scene have been doing things in the background for a long period of time, right? It's funny. I remember when Derek Halpern got really, really big, and I knew him before he ever had his blog. And the funny thing is I remember chatting with him, and he had this huge, ridiculously huge site beforehand. So he knew so much about online marketing already. And so everyone was like, where do you come from? And I'm like, well, he's really experienced and knows a lot of people in the space already. So coming out that way is way easier, right? Super smart about it all. And he he put his time in, right, beforehand, even if it wasn't, in the quote unquote expert space. It's really about putting that time in ahead of time. I know Chris Gilbo has a book all about that, like 365 days to overnight success, It's one of those things. I remember reading that book when I first started online and being like, am I ever going to be somebody that people care about, right? What makes me different? But it really is about putting your time in. And the hard thing is, the reason why I write about patience and I care so much about it is only having 20 hours a week makes me slower than other people, right? John Dumas, a client of mine that has a podcast, a great podcast. I just interviewed him for his show. He hit over $1 million cash in the bank. Insane. In 2 years, by the way. He worked like 80 hours a week. So every week that I had, you know what I mean? He did, 4 of my weeks in one, right? So it's one of those things where you definitely need to put in the time and the effort and the energy, but knowing that it's going to be a long-term gain. When I started my blog, my daughter was 0, right? She was just born, and now she's 5 and going to school. And I kept thinking, when she's 5 and going to school, I want to have an awesome business that I love, that I only have to work when they're in school. I don't have to work a lot outside of that. And so having that plan and not having to rush to get there. 5 years is a long time. Not having to rush to be like, oh my gosh, I need to do this now, is way better. Don't get me wrong though. I am impatient in general, and I am an overachiever. So I like to do things now and I like to see results and progress now. So a lot of my journey was me going, chill. Like, you're fine, Jamie. That's why it's called Eventual Millionaire. That's your whole brand, right? You love your life. That's important. You don't need money like super fast. It was just one of those things where, it's talking to myself, right? Making sure that I'm doing what I say I'm doing, and having that patience was huge. And so the way I did it was just looking forward farther. I was just chatting earlier this morning about the next 10 years, and 10 years is a long time. Right? And so looking at going, okay, 10 years, what can I do in 10 years? Well, in 5, I've done this. So imagine what I can do in 10, knowing what I know now. Right? But give yourself the time and the space to really achieve the dreams that you want, because it will definitely take some effort.
And you mentioned that John Lee Dumas mentioned to me in one of our interviews that he actually sought out your advice and that you mentored him right from day dot, right?
Yes. He had nothing when I first started.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And so I guess one part of the question is, how important is mentoring to actually fast track that learning curve? Because I presume he would have learned a lot from you when he started out his podcast from that in-person mentoring. And I guess let's address that first. Yeah, how important is mentoring for you, for him, and the millionaires that you speak with?
It is ridiculously huge. I think one of the things, and I just interviewed him and all he did was gush about my coaching, which was wonderful. I was like, great, thanks, John. But that's the thing, right? Me and John went to high school together, which is funny. And we lived in Maine, right? And there's not a lot of podcasters in Maine. I think I knew every single one of them. And so the fact that I was right there, for him is sort of amazing, right? That it worked out that well. But the fact that I knew everybody in the space, not everybody, but I was friends with a lot of the people in the space. So when he came in, not only did I teach him how to podcast and run a business, like how he needs to really pay attention to his ideal avatar and some of the basics, but I introduced him to everybody I know, which really jump-started what he did. He talks about this all the time. It's probably easier coming from his mouth than mine, but he talks a lot about how having those first intros of having me say, this guy's cool, really made a difference and helped get his first few interviews with some really top guys. And then it went from there, right? And of course, tweaking and making your marketing message great. I'm a huge fan of mentors, and so are millionaires. I have a board of mentors, which are 4 millionaires that I've interviewed before that are in different aspects of business. One's a futurist because I want to be a futurist. Some guys do webinars and web marketing, and so I have different pieces and parts. And I talk to them every quarter, and I talk to them via email and texting. And I have a coach too. Like, I have this stuff because I know it works, right? If somebody can give me the answer faster, so I don't have to bang my head against the wall and figure it out, that's what I want. And so that's what millionaires do too. If you can find somebody that already has what you want and is willing to mentor you or coach you, then do it. Like, it will make your learning curve so much shorter. Instead of going, should I do these one of 10 things? They can go, do this or this. Both of these work well. Right? That's huge. That saves so much time. So yes, as you can tell, I gush about it. I highly, highly recommend it.
That's unreal. Now, on your episode with Gary Vaynerchuk, you mentioned that you wanted Mark Cuban on your show. First question is Mark Cuban still your white whale?
So I adore Mark Cuban. He's not my top guy, though, by the way. Though I chatted with, now that I'm in Austin, I get to hang out with a lot of the people I interview. And I was hanging out with one of them 2 weeks ago, and he was like, well, I know Mark Cuban. I can give you his assistant's email address. I was like, good. Okay, cool. So, which thank you for reminding me I have to follow up with him. But the funny thing is, I'm a huge fan of Ray Kurzweil and, the Singularity. And so he is or Elon Musk, of course, because who doesn't want to go into space? So, so those two people I would actually love more than Mark Cuban, but Mark Cuban is definitely a huge one too. So those three are my top three. So anyone that knows anyone that might know them, let me know.
Get in touch with
Jamie.
Jamie.
On the search. No, it's funny. I was saying that I wanted a billionaire, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted Mark Cuban. And I've been connecting with one, and he randomly Skype messaged me yesterday. So I posted on Twitter, like, it's always fun to get randomly Skype messaged by a billionaire.
That's really cool.
Oh, it's funny.
I remember Gary's advice in that interview you did with him is that he would say email somebody, if you have an aspirational contact, that you'd email them once a week at least for 6 months. What's the longest you've had to chase someone or been chasing somebody for?
So that's the thing. I didn't take Gary's advice. I'll completely admit it. I'm booked out for months in advance. Which is amazing. I get introductions to millionaires so like every day. My assistant was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't fit these in. We have so many introductions." And I'm like, "Man, too many millionaires. What the heck? Problems. These are horrible problems to have." It's so silly the way that works, right? And so I haven't chased too many people. If there's somebody that I really, really want, I'll try and get an introduction. So like with Seth Godin, when I really, really wanted to get him on the show, I asked him, he said no. And I was like, oh. And he emailed me back and was like, no, that's not the type of show I'm usually on because it has the word millionaire. You know what I mean? That sort of thing. He didn't want to be seen as a millionaire. And I tried to explain, well, it's not about the money. And he's like, nope, I'm good. I'm like, darn it. So then I ended up hanging out with some people that were friends of his at a conference. And his friend was like, well, why don't you email him again? Just ask him again. And I'm like, I already asked him. She's like, no, ask him again. So I asked him, I name dropped her because I was like, she suggested I email you again. And he goes, anyone that's a friend of hers is a friend of mine. I'll do it. Right. And I was like, okay, sweet. Right. So there's ways to get in. I mean, I've done this with, Andrew Warner too. At the very, very beginning, he also said no. I don't like taking no for an answer. So if they respond back and they say no, I'm like, I can get this, right? I can do this. No response back. I'm like, I'm kind of annoyed, but I won't go crazy. When they say no, I'm like, no, I can convince you. So with Andrew, what I ended up doing was I got a guest post on Social Media Examiner, which has like 200,000 subscribers. And I tweeted Andrew and said, hey, Andrew, I'm writing a post for a site with 220,000 subscribers. Can I put you in it? ? Right? Within 15 minutes, he adds me, and DMs me his cell phone number to call him. He's like, yep, I'm up for a call right now. I was like, oh shoot, cause my kids were home when I tweeted that. And I was like, okay, kids, shh, be quiet in the background. Let me go talk to Andrew. So I got on the line with him, and it's funny. We had a bunch of similar friends. So we were chatting, and I was like, oh, I was just hanging out with him last week. And he's like, no way, you're friends with him? I'm like, yeah. And I go, and I asked you to come on my show already, and you said no. And he was like, really? He's like, no, I'll totally come on your show. Okay, good. Right? And so whatever we can do, even if you get a no, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily a no. They just set up, different, rules and boundaries so that way everybody, can't interview them. But eventually, if you get to know and get past the wall and understand, they're just people, you can get them to say yes to. Does that make sense? I haven't done that with Mark Cuban yet, but I'm sure I'll figure out something.
No, I love that. I love those stories. They're absolutely brilliant. Now, I spoke a little bit earlier about focus and setting clear priorities. I recall from your interview with Vern Harnish, who's a mentor and someone who I have followed and admired for years. But I remember him saying that it was only in the last 100 years or so that the word priority has actually turned into the word priorities, meaning that, you used to have either one priority, you couldn't have two because otherwise one would have to be the priority, the other would be the second most important thing, so therefore it wasn't the priority. How important is focus, and why do you think the English language and our mentality has suddenly allowed us to introduce more than one priority and therefore, I guess, dilute our attention or potentially distract us from what really is the single most important thing?
I think we all want to do everything all the time, right? I mean, most entrepreneurs in general want to do it all the time. I mean, we're like ADD. I mean, looking through the millionaires that I've interviewed, half of them are like, I feel like I have ADD, which is true, right? We have so many ideas, which is awesome. But when I interviewed, I think it was the first 50, I went through and I looked up the word focus, like looking through the transcripts, and it was 100 and something times in those interviews. I'm like, seriously, I've only have 50 interviews, but at least twice in every interview on average, they brought up the word focus. That's insane, right? That's ridiculously insane. And that's something that comes up over and over and over again. You'll see somebody that's a serial entrepreneur and everybody looks at them going, oh my gosh, they're amazing. And a lot of newer people that are coming up are like, I have 3 companies. And you're like, well, none of them are successful, but I have 3 companies, right? And all they're doing are spreading themselves really, really thin. What millionaires say and what a serial entrepreneur says is you have to go hard on one thing and make that a success before you ever start another company. And so when you have, and there's a great book actually called Essentialism. I don't know if you've read it yet.
I'm reading it now.
Exactly, right? This is why we're talking about this. So there's a great image in it. Of course, I can't describe it, but it really shows the power of when you spread your focus, how little progress in the way of like trying to hit the finish line you make. Whereas if you really focus on one thing, I mean, this is one of the things that I do in my group coaching program. I make them pick one goal and they get mad at me. They're like, well, I'm like, no, one thing. And it has to be measurable. So it can be money, it can be time, it can be how many sales you want, how many prospects you want, whatever it is. But we are only focusing on this. And we have kick butt testimonials because for 3 months they're hustling. It's called Millionaire Hustlers. They're hustling on one thing. One guy who started at $500 a month and made 10 grand the 3rd month of the Hustlers group. And it's like because he was really paying attention. I don't think business owners pay as much attention as they should to sales, which is hilarious, right? Because you're only a business if you sell things. Exactly. But I have gone in so many businesses and people are like tweaking things on their website and like doing these things that I call passive actions. The things that aren't very uncomfortable. Right? They're not necessarily, I mean, I've seen this with coaches a ton, but with a ton of other people too. When they're like, oh, okay, well, you know, I tweaked my website this week and I did this and I'm trying to do this new social strategy. And I'm like, well, how many prospects did you talk to? If you want to, you know, get clients, how many people did you talk? Well, you know, on Twitter, maybe I'm like, how many sales appointments did you ask them to? Well, right? We want it to be easy. We want people to just sort of come to us. Yay, you want my stuff. Yay, I'm awesome. But you have to ask for what you want. Right?
And that can be quite uncomfortable, right?
It's super uncomfortable. People are not fans usually. Unfortunately. But that's what really makes the difference. So like in Hustlers, I'm like, you have to do the hard stuff. The stuff that makes a difference is, stepping outside of your comfort zone. And don't get me wrong, I remember being scared as all heck when I'd asked for a sale way back when. But it gets so much easier once you do it over and over and over again. But when you're focusing on that, that's when the money comes in. That's when you're really making progress. When you're like, how many people did I talk to today? One of the things I do with anyone when we set goals is we set those numbers, right? So if they're like, I want 3 clients, right? Okay, I want 3 clients. Great. How many people do you need to talk to in order to get 3 clients? Oh shoot. Okay. Well, I usually have a 50% close ratio. So I need to have 6 sales appointments. Awesome. How many people do you need to talk to in order to get 6 sales appointments? Okay. Well, probably a lot. So maybe it might be, and then they go back through and figure it out. Maybe it's 30 people that they need to talk to. So in order to get 3 clients, you need to talk to 30 people. And I don't know what anyone's sales ratio is. I'm just making this up, but it's one of those things where you're like, okay, this month I need to talk to 1 person a day. So that way I can get the 6 sales appointments I need. So that way I can, so it's a numbers game, which is so funny. Even online, even in web marketing, it's a numbers game. How many people see my ad? How many people click on it? It's funny the way that you can break it all down and then you can know exactly what you need to do. Okay, great. We need to have 10,000 people see this ad that are of the right avatar, of the right sort of market. Great. And then eventually we'll have this many people click on it and we'll have this much. Like that's what millionaires do. They really pay attention to the metrics and the numbers so that way they can start trying to predict. Don't get me wrong. It's not right every single time and you can increase your ratios for them. So it's easier, conversion rates and sales ratios. But it's figuring that stuff out so you know what actions you need to take. Because sometimes we have that disconnect between what we want, our goal, and how to get there. But I think it's because we're not breaking it down small enough to really find out what those actions are that we need to do.
Awesome. Another really good framework that I learned from your book is the idea of an absolute yes. So that if you're just maybe, yeah, that's a good idea, I should do that, well, that's really a no. And if it's an absolutely yes, then that's a really good indicator to actually take on a project. Now, Jamie, I know you have to go. So have you got any final pieces of advice or closing thoughts? And how can listeners get in touch with you?
So the last question that I ask my people every single interview, I've done almost 200 millionaire interviews, and I ask what's one action listeners can take this week to move them forward towards their goal of $1 million, because I'm a huge fan of action.
Right.
And the one that comes up over and over and over again is to really do something that scares you that week, right? To look at your goal and figure out what would be the best way to reach that, and what's that thing that I probably have been avoiding and don't really want to do. Right? What is that thing that's really going to make a difference? Whether it's, asking for a specific sale, trying to do a partnership, like whatever it is, that thing that you're in the back of your head just really freaking scared to do that this week. And it'll start to build momentum. And the more you can do that, the more your business changes for the better. Does that make sense? And everybody can find me if you go to eventualmillionaire.com. All of the millionaire interviews are there, along with information about millionaire hustlers, and you can sign up for my list and get the 3 habits of all successful millionaires. But you can definitely find me there and on Twitter and Facebook and all that fun stuff.
Thank you so much, Jamie. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and you have yourself a fantastic day.
You too. Go back to sleep. Take care, Adam.
Cheers, Jamie. See you. And that's a wrap for my chat with Jaime Tardy. It was a huge pleasure to get up at 3 a.m. to have a chat with her. As we discussed, she only has 20 hours that she works each week, and she's booked out for months in advance. So it was a real honour to be squeezed into her 20-hour schedule for the week. It's actually taken me quite a while to get Jamie on the show, because I reached out to her when her book was coming out. It was about the same time as my book, Web Marketing That Works, was coming out. So we had a little bit of a dialogue back then, and I asked her probably 4 or 5 months ago if she'd like to come on the show, and she politely said no, she was booked out. But she put me on her wait list, and I got the email from her assistant just 2 weeks ago saying that there was a couple of vacant slots in her availability, and I looked at them all. They were all 3 a.m, so I thought, well, that's what you've got to do to get someone like Jamie on the show, and I'm very pleased that I did. What I particularly enjoyed about that chat was just that power of focus, and with herself, but also the millionaires that she's interviewed, focusing on one thing. And that's been one of the things that I've struggled with personally, is getting excited by the new shiny things and all these different possibilities with web marketing. And it's taken my business partner, Toby, to really help me, just pick one thing and go with it. Like last quarter, webinars was our thing. We wanted to just get that shipped and do that. And we did. But see, the previous quarter, webinars was also on our list, but so was a whole bunch of other things like guest blogging and creating a new product. So we got distracted, and it diluted our efforts, and none of those goals were successfully executed. But last quarter, the webinars we ran consistently, we're making sales on them, and it was a really nice feeling at the end of the quarter. So thanks, Tobes, for that as well. The other thing that I liked about Jamie and the answers to my questions was particularly the power of a mentor, and just seeing her impact on John Lee Dumas, who we've interviewed not on the podcast, but on our YouTube interview series that we had before we kicked off the podcast. But as you know, Jamie mentored him, and he actually he knew her from high school, as we found out in the story, but he approached her and asked to be mentored because Jamie had this successful podcast, and just by doing so was able to fast track his learning curve. And that's something that Toby and I advocate highly, is finding mentors, sometimes in a paid capacity, sometimes in a free capacity, but really there's no harm in asking. And even from day one of our business, we have asked people to mentor us, typically in an informal capacity, where if we've got a specific problem, we are totally comfortable going to have a coffee with them and have a discussion to try and solve that issue. So we've had about 8 or 10 mentors that we've worked closely with at various points in our 10-year journey. Totally extremely valuable, because again, yes, you can tap into all that experience and knowledge on an as-needed basis. It's so much easier than trying to learn it yourself. In fact, we wouldn't even be in business if it weren't for our mentors. They helped us through that many tricky points and helped highlight the way for many business decisions that we've made as well. So thank you for listening all the way through to the end of this show. It was brought to you by our book called Web Marketing That Works and the 33 marketing templates that go with it. They're yours for free at bluewiremedia.com.au/book. We always want to deliver actionable advice on these shows, and your feedback and questions are always welcome. So please let me know at adam.franklin@bluewiremedia.com.au or tweet me at Franklin_Adam, and I will see you next time. Thank you.